Tom Ridge is a name you might remember from the latter part of the decade. He was the first Homeland Security Secretary appointed by Republican George W. Bush. And he says that climate change is a significant issue because of its security implications. This is something that we've heard recently, numerous reports coming out over the past few years from the military talking about how they're preparing for a world changed by climate change. But here's Tom Ridge. Let's watch.
In 2013, you signed a letter that said climate change was one of the preeminent threats to the nation with respect to national security. I'm wondering, as you've watched in recent months, weeks, your own party, the Republican Party, sort of shy away from acknowledging its existence. I'm wondering if you could talk about that, and if you're...
Okay, this is a non sequitur. This is
It's national security.
Governor, respond.
Well, national security.
Well, let me give you an uneducated. I'm not a scientist, but let me just tell you my personal point of view. It's pretty difficult for me to believe that millions of tons of SOx, NOx, and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is a good thing. So let's start with that premise. And regardless of whether or not you believe that causation is strictly man-made, there's probably, and there certainly is a component of that. The fact of the matter is that the global climate change is affecting sea levels, water levels, and there have been several interesting studies, most recently in the past week or two, where they really talked about the effect of the warming of the climate, the destruction of the icebergs, and the potential peril to major urban areas along our coast. So at the end of the day, is it a potential challenge for us? Yes. Is it a security challenge in the sense that it could bring destruction and economic damage if we don't appreciate the fact that it's happening and try to do something in anticipation of it occurring? It's a real serious problem.
Yeah. Okay.
Secretary Ridge, real quickly, just back to Homeland Security, your opinion on Gitmo.
Yeah, I'm much more interested in his opinions on climate change personally.
When did Haas get on Morning Joe without his glasses? Didn't that look like him?
I didn't take note at the time.
It looked like him.
But yeah, so that was his uneducated, as he says, but much more educated than what had already been going on Morning Joe take on national security and climate change.
So,
what do you guys think?
Can I just make the point, so when this stuff happens, right, so you have Tom Ridge going, well, I'm not, which is nice to hear him say, I'm not a scientist, but I'll just say this. And then I'm sure, I don't know who else was saying, but here's the thing, people go, well, you know, I believe this and they believe that, and here's what I think about that. And it's just weird to see a bunch of people who aren't climate scientists debate climate science on television as if there's a debate. There isn't a debate about climate change. That debate has already taken place. It's taken place between climate scientists, and they all agree that humans are causing, very likely, that humans are causing the acceleration of climate change, meaning global warming. The debate is over. There is no debate.
Jimmy,
so whatever thing you have, I'm not a climate scientist, you're not a climate scientist, Tom Ridge isn't a climate scientist, Joe Scarborough isn't a climate scientist, Bill Nye isn't a climate scientist. You know who are climate scientists? Are climate scientists, and they all fucking agree. There isn't one there's one major national or international scientific body that disagrees on climate change. There isn't one in the whole world. There isn't one scientific body that disagrees with climate change. They all agree.
So they say 97% of the climate scientists themselves. So I guess there's no like group that has come together and gone against it. But 97% of scientists, you know, did you guys hear John Kerry this week said this thing about how even if, he said, you know what, come with me on this ride. Even, I don't like John Kerry. I've made it very clear. I've disagreed with almost everything he's done. I think he's a liar.
Not a fan.
And I'm not a fan. However, I did think he made a good point with this. What he said this week was, he's like, you know what? Even if 97% of the professionals, the scientists that are working, that this is their job, even if they're wrong about this, and we do some of the changes that we should do, that they say we should do, invest more in solar power and wind power and green energies and things like that, we're not going to be any worse off. You know what I mean? We're just shifting money from an oil economy to a green economy. So even if all of them are wrong, which they're probably not because they're based in science, which is based in fact, then maybe we should still be doing this. And I thought that was a pretty great way of sort of leveling the argument that, you know, if you want to make an economic argument, well, there's still economic benefits to going green, actually.
Yeah, there was I think it was the Apollo initiative over the past 10 years. That's the argument they're making, is this is a massive potential boon to the economy to invest in renewable energy. For whatever reason, it didn't take off, I suppose, because the people who are receptive to economic arguments are generally more Republicans, and they already have companies that they support, and it's ExxonMobil and BP and things like that. But yeah, what I like about having someone like Tom Ridge come out and talk about how we need to do something about this is that he is a representative of basically national defense. And we know what the military is doing. Whether, Ted Cruz wants to argue about whether or not it's happening, or Marco Rubio doesn't trust the science, the military is already preparing for it. And they say they want to support the military. The military says it's happening, and they say that the military should shut the fuck up.
It just comes down to, again, this isn't a debate. There's no debate about climate change. The debate has taken place, and if you understand how a scientific debate happens, it means that no other scientists are using the work done by climate change deniers to further their science. So if that's what people do. When you write a scientific paper, you base it on the science of other people's work. Here's what their observations, and no one ever uses the anti-climate change scientists' data or their conclusions or their work. No one ever, it's not used. So that's what they mean. They don't actually poll, but they know by going through the data and who's using that. So, and again, I'm not a scientist, but I get it. This is not a debate. That's the whole thing. It's like, but 3% of the scientists, 3% of the scientists think that you can cure AIDS by fucking a virgin. That doesn't mean it's real. But CNN will bring those people on as if it's the other side of the argument.
And then you have to give them half the time.
And you have to give them half the time. So that's the problem with the media's debate of climate scientists, climate science, is they'll give it equal weight. It doesn't. There isn't a 50. There is no debate.
By the way, why is it that climate change is the only thing that people seem to think scientists are politically motivated when it comes to? You know what I mean? No one debates the morals of scientists related to anything else. There's nothing I can think of. Can you guys think of anything where they think that scientists have all colluded together to politically do something?
They've tricked us into using amoxicillin for infections too.
Those
They've
sons
also
of
those sons of
bitches.
bitches, because they all got money in amoxicillin.
Yeah, and somebody back then probably said, "You see, 97% of scientists say."
I mean, there was sort of a similar pushback against the science that said, that we can deal with acid rain or lead pollution and things like that. I mean, there was some of that, and there are cases where scientists actually have been sort of corrupted by money. For instance, all the doctors who are saying that cigarettes are perfectly fine for you. And so those earlier things are leading people to think that it's sort of up for debate. We can just sort of vote on whether or not science is applicable to something, and that's not the case.